Another bank fails. Also, there's a massive takeover by a bigger bank. What does this actually mean for your money? And also, is your money safe in these regional banks that are struggling? Especially when the big dogs, the big banks, the government-backed banks are expanding. And expanding to a point of really a scary situation. Because what happens when all of a sudden that bank decides what policy is? Because the more banks they have, the more power they have, the more leverage they have on you. Let's jump into today's stories as we talk about your money and how important it is, because everybody's got it. Everybody wants more of it. Everybody's trying to figure out a way to save it. Let's jump into it. Today's video starts right now.
And I saw you walking the line, and the truth made.
Hey guys, welcome to the Max. It is a freezing cold morning here in South Mississippi. This weather is just completely wonky. I think a lot of places are getting a little warmer. We're actually getting a little colder, which, you know, it's kind of one of those things that Mississippi, if you stay here another day, it will be summer tomorrow, then you stay another day, it will be winter again. So it's funny, the kids were swimming in the pool just 2 days ago, and now literally we're fixing to light the fire again. Isn't that crazy? If you're new to the channel, go down here, press subscribe, ring the bell. It does help us. When you are watching, when you are commenting, when you are giving us a thumbs up, it does help us share our message across this platform, which means the world to me. So I humbly thank you for being a part of this channel. Now let's talk about the stories and your money and how important it is. So another bank struggles. This is Bank Corp Community Bank in New York. Now this is a monster regional bank. It's actually gotten downgraded by Moody's, and it cannot cover its own depositors. There's a story that says that about a third of the depositors are uninsured, meaning people's money is not safe if all of a sudden this bank shuts down. Now here's the thing, when these banks start shutting down, what happens? What happens? They don't just close, do they? FDIC is not strong enough to back them, so what happens? They become a sale. They become a fire sale. Well, who always buys those fire sales? Who would you say predominantly buys those fire sales? JP Morgan Chase and other big banks. We're going to talk about them in just a second. So we have regional banks struggling, and again, another monster regional bank. And again, it goes back to the leadership of the bank, but also the volatility of this time. Now, I'm not a proponent for lowering rates. Actually, I think the Fed chairman has done a pretty good job of keeping the rates a little higher. To me, we've gotten so used to free money and borrowing money. That's why we're in the place that we're at. So I actually don't believe we need to lower rates anytime soon, which will ultimately hurt us, but I think it's teaching us a valuable lesson of how stupid we were over the last few years. This bank was a huge bank. It is having some problems with regulators. It's literally at a full collapse, so they're going to have to figure out something. Also, UBS, another monster bank, says their shares and the earnings are way down, and it says the outlook for 2024 is darkened. We don't know what to expect, but we know it will be grim. Now, does that mean it's going to be bad for your money personally at your local bank? Maybe not. But what I am saying is you need to be keeping an eye on the financial institutions, because ultimately there's a big game at play here. And here's the secret. When these community banks close, when these little small local banks close, even though we like that connection to our bankers and to the people that's at those branches, there's a bigger play behind the scenes. JP Morgan Chase plans a massive branch network expansion, while also, as small banks implode, they're looking to expand in the areas of rural and smaller community settings. It says mega bank JP Morgan Chase is plotting a massive expansion. It plans to open 500 new branches, renovating 1,700 more branches, and hiring upwards of 3,500 new employees. Remember, all the while, small banks, regional banks, are literally sent tumbling. They're imploding. They're not having enough money to float what they're needing. They're not actually getting covered the way they're supposed to, because they can't deal with the regulations. They can't deal with the higher expenses. They're not making loans because of the interest rates and because people have no money and discretionary ableness to just borrow, especially when houses and auto and all these other things are costing too much. And also they're so inundated with buying things with credit cards that instead of buying a more secure loan or having a more secure loan from the bank because they can't get it, they're now using credit cards, so they have no way to go borrow any more money. It's actually gotten harder to borrow money at banks. All the while, what it's doing, it's causing that to be a strain on the local banks. Remember, banks need you to borrow money. Our whole economy is based on people borrowing money, which is not a good thing, by the way. When we go off the gold standard and we need this new monetary theory that they're pushing, people's got to borrow money. So who is it hurting? It's not hurting the big banks because they have tons of liquidity and tons of assets, and they're involved in the stock market and so tied to the government. But these smaller banks do not have that availability. They're taking a lot more risk, so you're seeing them shut down. So what JP Morgan Chase is doing is they're buying all these banks in a fire sale. So they're coming away with huge assets with the government saying, hey, look, here you go. You don't have to take all the liabilities. Take these buys. They've done that countless times again. Why? Because for one thing, our government and FDIC is not even strong enough to back some of the majority banks, much less all the ones if they start failing. So therefore, they're putting a fire sale and saying, look, we're going to shut it down. We'll let you buy it at a good discount, and we'll just cover the liability. So JP Morgan is coming away with banks for literally pennies on the dollar and making billions as part of the whole situation, the whole scheme. Listen to this. Chase will enter new markets, low to moderate income states and communities, also rural communities, and giving access to places that do not have a lot of traditional banking, which means they're going to put more competition versus your smaller banks, which will be bad. Now, I love competition. I think competition helps us be better. However, when you're competing against a giant, it's almost impossible. Other than David and Goliath in the Bible, it's pretty impossible. JP Morgan continued, the multi-billion-dollar commitment will contribute to local economic growth through construction, ongoing, and community investments, and local hiring, which will make a bigger footprint for the bank in all these communities. Now, why is this a big deal? This sounds good. This sounds amazing. It sounds like, wow, they're giving us jobs. They're doing so much for us. This bank, just like the other 2 or 3 monster banks in our area, is getting more and more power, along with the fact that the government is backing them, because you hear the quote, too big to fail. Republicans and Democrats both say this. When you have banks like this that has so much money, so much power, so much assets, and can really almost sway the whole economic way of America, that means they have not only the power of money, they have the power of political action. They can make anything and everything happen. Now, let's say this. Say, for instance, they get more involved with the government. And I'll be honest with you, Jamie Dimon is not someone that I would say is an uber liberal or a uber conservative. I actually don't. There's things he does that sometimes make sense, and some of the talking points he has, and then there's some things that are completely out there. I'm not saying I support him or not. What I'm saying, though, is when we turn around and give so much power to these big monopolized banks, it allows them to set policy for everything. So say they have certain agendas. Well, you've got to go along with it. Think about this. If small banks close, only big banks are available. You're scared to keep all your money under the mattress. You go start putting it in these banks. If they start having bank holidays or agendas on, ESG, on how to figure out how to do CBDC better, how to differentiate between the dollar, or what is your politics, and do we want you to be involved with our bank? You will have to go along with it, because ultimately they're buying out all their competition. It's kind of like energy. I cannot stand paying an energy bill. When we pay our electricity bill, it makes me so mad because there's no competition and they have these random charges on me, and I can't do anything about it because it's monopolized. Well, we're getting in the same way when it comes to our beef. It's getting the same way when it comes to our chicken. It's getting the same way when it comes to any and everything we deal with. It's amazing we have laws against monopolization. However, we're allowing the banks to do the exact thing that we're saying that you're not allowed to do. But it's because they're so powerful and they have so much money and they have so much influence in our White House and in our Congress because they've been bought and paid for. Therefore, their policies matter, and whatever they say actually goes. They're involved too much with the Fed. So all this goes into hurting you. Why? All your money is in the bank, and they set a certain policy, and you can't touch your money unless you agree with that policy. What are you going to do? You remember Airbnb put out something not too long ago. They weren't allowing conservatives, quote unquote, big name conservatives, to stay with them because of their policies. And it was impacting a lot of people because everybody got used to using Airbnb. If you start seeing these bigger businesses say, well, this is what I believe, this is what you've got to believe if you support us. If you don't, we will basically persecute you, or we'll basically hold your funds, or we'll basically release your funds back to you. It's making you more vulnerable, so therefore you're going to do what they say for most of the time. Now you're saying, oh, I would never do that. What if your debt is tied to these banks? What if all of a sudden they buy out your local bank, and so therefore they have your mortgage, they have your car loans, they have your credit card loan, and then they have your HELOC because you're in debt up to your eyeballs, and all of a sudden they say, you know what, I'm either going to call your loans or you're going to support this. I'm going to call your loans or you're going to quit saying what you're saying. I'm going to call your loans or we're going to close down your accounts. Do you see how it can impact you? Because remember, the borrower is always slave to the lender. This goes nationwide, this goes statewide, and this also goes to your local personal bank. This goes to you. If you're hocked up to your eyeballs, which we are as Americans, and all of a sudden the bank becomes more monopolized, they have more power over you because not only do they hold your money, they hold your debt, and that's a big deal. There's another story on Zero Hedge. It says millennials own less than half the real estate and wealth that the boomers do. Now, boomers are still struggling. You know that if you're a boomer, some of you are doing very well, but some are still struggling. You didn't put enough retirement up. You're still paying on a mortgage even at 50, 60 years old. Guess what? It's even worse for millennials. And even guess what? It's even worse for Gen Zers because they're starting to live with all the boomers and millennials that are their parents and grandparents. So what's happening? We're being more involved in systems to where we have no independence. We're still needing banks to give us more and more money. We're still needing government to step in and give us more and more because we can't control our own spending. We can't save enough money. So all this impacts us because when the bank gets stronger and it's tied to the government bureaucracy, it allows them to set policies, and it doesn't take the government saying, I'm going to be a dictator or a tyrannical leader. It takes them saying, I'm going to impact you with public-private partnerships, such as my relationship with these big banks. These big banks set policy, and guess what? You have to follow them because you are in debt. So again, what are some of the ways that you can stay away from this situation? First of all, if you can afford real estate, absolutely buy real estate. If you can afford a small piece and you can grow it later or add to it later, do it. If you can support your local bank, support your local small bank. If you have a credit union, support that. Make sure they're strong. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. I understand that. But get away from these big banks because these big banks are taking your money and it's making them more powerful to then hold it against you. Do you honestly think they care about you? No, they care about the power that you're giving them. And then again, this public-private partnership that they've built with the government, the Fed, and then it's giving them more power than you can imagine. So support your local bank. Also remember, gold and silver is the way to stay away from tyrannical rule. If you can have independence in your money, so having precious metals, having cash on hand, as it is right now, it's still good. But more than that, buying assets. I just bought another piece of equipment for the farm. It's not a big piece, wasn't a lot of money, but it's going to bring a huge asset to my farm, and I was able to pay cash for it. Now, is it something that's going to interest you? Probably not, but it brought value to me. So sometimes I don't know what you need the most, but you may know that there's something like a shed, there's something like a tool, there's something like a piece of equipment, there's a vehicle, there's a real estate buy, there's timber, there's livestock, there's another buy that can benefit you as an asset that gives you value. You have to find value other than putting it in the bank. You have to find value other than borrowing money all the time. And you have to realize that if we don't start taking care of our financial households individually, we're going to depend on the government and depend on these big banks to set our whole way of life. Talk about dystopian futures. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Remember, small banks, getting some precious metals, tangibly having those, also keeping some cash, but making sure you have a way to save it and make sure you understand budgeting and don't blow your money. Get out of debt and understand value in real estate, assets such as livestock, land, trees, even vehicles. If they're older vehicles and they're antiqued and they're not really losing any extra value, if you can purchase some of those, it'd be wonderful. Look for ways to put your money in safer places. Food and water, I always just beg you to do because that's the smartest. When you have that independence is what brings on more persecution because they don't like you. But when you have that independence, it allows you not to be as affected as what most people will be. Because if you're in debt up to your eyeballs, all your money's in these big banks, then you will have no say and you will be a slave to the lender. Thank you so much for watching. God bless. Happy homesteading.